My name is Taryn Briggs, and I'm 31 years old. On a Wednesday night in October, I was making pasta when my doorbell rang at 9:15. I know it was a Wednesday because I only make pasta on Wednesdays. It's the one night after a long shift when I don't want to make any decisions about dinner. I looked through the peephole and saw my brother's face, and just behind him, my nephew, standing in the hallway in a yellow rain jacket 2 sizes too small. The cuffs stopping halfway up his forearms. His backpack sat on both shoulders. He was holding a juice box with both hands the way little kids do when they need something solid to hold on to. My brother smiled the way he smiles at everyone, easy, confident, like the cameras were already rolling. "Hey sis, just need you to take Levi for a couple days, work thing came up." I thought the hardest part of that night was already standing on my doormat. I was wrong. It took 9 months to find out what hard actually looked like. But before I tell you what my brother came back asking for, and you won't believe what he asked, you need to hear what he left behind. Welcome to Peaceful Drama Stories, where quiet people find their voice and family secrets come into the light. If you've ever been the one your family counted on a little too much, drop a comment below and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Now let me take you back to that hallway. I'm an emergency room social worker at a pediatric hospital in Cincinnati. I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've sat at more kitchen tables than I can count in the worst hours of people's lives and helped families figure out the next step when everything else had fallen apart. I know what a child looks like when they've been somewhere safe. I also know what a child looks like when they haven't. My nephew was 6 years old that October. He was small for his age, with a gap between his front teeth and a way of watching adults talk the way animals watch weather change. Very still, very careful, reading the air. He stepped inside my apartment and immediately went to the corner of my living room near the bookshelf, where my old reading chair sits, and he stood there without being told to, like a child who had learned to find the smallest space in every new room. My brother came inside long enough to set down a second bag I hadn't seen him carrying. A duffel blue, overfull, zipper straining. "Everything he needs is in there," my brother said. 2-3 days tops. "I've got a client thing in Miami. Big deal. You know how it is." I did not know how it was, because I am an ER social worker, and the closest I get to Miami is the Travel Channel. But I knew my brother, and I knew that sentence. "You know how it is," was the sentence he used when he didn't want to answer questions. I asked where my sister-in-law was. My brother looked at his phone. "She's around. Don't worry about it." He hugged me in that backslapping way, ruffled my nephew's hair without really looking at him, and walked back out the door. I heard the elevator at the end of my hall open and close. Levi and I stood in the entry looking at each other. "Are you hungry?" I said. He nodded. "I was making pasta." He nodded again. So we had pasta, and that was the first night. You have to understand my family to understand the 9 months that followed, and I can explain it with one memory. When I was 9 years old, I brought home a perfect score on a science test and taped it to the refrigerator. My mother glanced at it and said, "That's my girl, always reliable." Then my brother came home with a B- on the same test, and she sat with him for an hour at the kitchen table, going over every answer he'd missed, making sure he understood. When he finally got it, she hugged him and said, "There he is." I took the science test off the refrigerator that night. Not out of anger, just because I finally understood what it was for. My brother was 6 years older than me and had always needed a bigger stage. As kids, he needed the front seat, the window table, the story at dinner. As an adult, he built himself a stage out of a business card that said Garrett Capital Consulting, a leased Mercedes, and a lifestyle Instagram account where he posted about building generational wealth and teaching families to make money work for them. He had around 80,000 followers. He had a wife, my sister-in-law, who appeared in his posts holding a coffee cup and looking content. He had Levi, who appeared in his posts wearing matching outfits on holidays, and sometimes holding a sign that said things like future CEO. What I didn't know, that October, was that my sister-in-law had moved out in April. That Levi had been cycling between my brother's apartment, a woman from my brother's office, and my mother's house, sometimes for a week at a stretch. That my mother knew all of this and had not told me, because, and this is the exact sentence she used when I finally asked, "Your brother is handling it, Taryn. You've always had enough on your plate." That was the porch. Different generation, same script. Here is what was actually on my plate that October. I'd been passed over twice for a senior position at my hospital, and a colleague had finally sat me down and told me that the title I wanted didn't exist in Cincinnati. But there was a hospital in Denver building an ER social work program from scratch, and they needed a department lead, and she'd put my name in if I wanted. I had wanted it for 6 years. I had a phone interview scheduled for November 8th. I had a countdown on a sticky note on my bathroom mirror, 22 days. Instead, on night 2 of the new arrangement, I stood in my bathroom at midnight, doing the math on how to get a 6-year-old to school in the morning when I had no car seat, no school information, and no contact number for anyone except my brother, who had sent a single text that said "Sis niece" and then gone quiet as a stone. The first week taught me things fast. My nephew did not know the name of his school. He knew it was the one with the blue doors. He did not know his teacher's name. He called her the one with the ponytail. He did not know his own birthday without stopping to think about it, and when he finally said October 24th, he said it the way you'd say a fact you'd read somewhere, not a fact that belonged to you. He had been to 4 different schools in first grade because his living situation had changed 4 times. I work in pediatric emergency social work. I know the clinical language for what I was seeing. What I actually felt, those first nights, sitting outside the door of my second bedroom, listening to him breathe, was something the textbooks don't cover. The yellow rain jacket. I hung it by my door when he first came in, and I kept seeing it, faded, the Velcro worn soft so it barely stuck, the right sleeve seam starting to split. It was a size 4T. Levi was a size 6. It must have fit him 2 years ago. Somewhere in those 2 years no one had noticed. I bought him a coat the next Saturday. Blue, the right size, with a hood that actually covered his head. He put it on in the store and zipped it all the way to his chin, and stood in front of the mirror and looked at himself for a long moment. Then he looked at me in the mirror. "Is this mine?" he said. I said yes. He put his hands in the pockets. I went and paid for it with my eyes very busy looking at the cash register. My brother called on day 9. From Miami, he said, though the area code was a Florida number I didn't recognize. "Big deal, almost closed, just a few more days. You know how it is." I said, "Do you know what school your son goes to?" He said, "Taryn, come on, I'm in the middle of blue doors," I said. "That's all he knows. Blue doors and the teacher with the ponytail." Silence. "He's fine," my brother said. "He's with you, he's fine." I've had to deliver news that changed people's lives in 30 seconds. I've learned that the most important thing you can say sometimes is the smallest thing, said quietly. "He's not fine," I said, "and I need you to come home." He said he would. He said soon. He made the word sound like a place you could get to if you had the right directions. He did not come home. On day 14, because I am a mandatory reporter, and because I had documented everything, dates, the condition of the jacket, the school inconsistencies, what Levi had told me about the months before October, I made the call I had hoped I wouldn't have to make. I called the Department of Job and Family Services and reported a concern for a child's welfare. People ask me why I didn't do it sooner. The honest answer is that I spent 2 weeks convincing myself I was overreacting. Because that is what you do when the child is your nephew, and the adult failing him is your brother, and your mother is leaving you voicemails saying, "He's just going through a phase." You know how creative people are. I spent 2 weeks, being the person my family had always counted on to absorb the hard thing quietly. Then I stopped being that person and started being a social worker. The caseworker who came was named Mr. Yates, a tall, unhurried man with a thermos of coffee he never opened. He sat at my kitchen table and read through my documentation. I'd kept a running log in my work notebook, same as I do for every case, and he made notes without reacting to any of it, which told me he'd read worse. Kinship placement, he said. Background check, emergency custody. He said I was a strong candidate, given my profession and the stability of my home. He said courts respect relatives with consistent employment and no prior history. He asked, at the door, whether I had been in contact with the child's mother. I said my brother and my sister-in-law were separated, and that I didn't have a direct number for her. He nodded. He said, keep everything, every receipt, every school email, every medical appointment. Then he said the thing I have heard from the other side of this table and never fully understood until now. You're not building a case. You're building a record. The difference matters. That night I started a second notebook, not a work one, a home one. The November phone interview for Denver happened on a Tuesday 10 days into the custody process. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage at 4 in the afternoon and talked to the department director for 40 minutes about emergency social work protocols and staffing models. She said all the right things. I said all the right things. At the end, she said they'd be in touch, and I knew from her voice it would be quickly. I knew from my car, with the seat pushed back and the notebook in my lap, that I was going to have to make a decision I hadn't anticipated. I told my supervisor the next morning. She put her coffee down. Denver's been trying to poach you for 2 years, she said. And you finally got in the door. I said yes. And now this. I said yes. She said, what do you need? I said I needed to think. My brother surfaced in December. Not in person. A voice note at 11 at night. The sound of somewhere busy behind him. He needed me to Venmo him $800. His card had been declined. Just a bridge. You've always had savings, Taryn. You've been saving since college. I'm going to pay you back the second this deal closes. I listened to it twice. Then I typed one sentence back, no. His response came in 90 seconds. Wow, okay, good to know where we stand. I had never told my brother no in 31 years. The word felt like stepping off a curb you'd always assumed was higher than it was. 3 days later, my mother called. She had that specific voice she uses when she thinks she's mediating, careful and sad and already braced for me to be difficult. She said my brother was going through a hard time. She said family helped family. I said that Levi had started a new school this week and had come home and told me it was the one with the yellow doors, and that he'd said it like he was already filing it away in the category of things that don't last. I told her I had sat on the edge of his bed that night for 20 minutes, wondering how a 6-year-old learns to catalog impermanence like that. My mother was quiet. Then she said, "You've always been so strong, Taryn." There it was. Same sentence, same shape, same function. Strong didn't mean powerful. It meant load-bearing. It meant the refrigerator where you tape the test score that nobody's going to sit down and celebrate with you. I rinsed the cup I was holding and said I had to go start dinner. I wasn't angry. I was done, and done is quieter than angry. Done doesn't announce itself. It just moves in a different direction without explanation. Here is what January looked like. Because I want you to see the new shape of things. Mornings, breakfast at 7. Levi's lunch packed the night before, because mornings are not the time for decisions. Drop off at the school with the yellow doors, which Levi had started calling my school about 3 weeks in. That is the kind of sentence that sounds small and is not small at all. Evenings, homework at the kitchen table. He was behind in reading, not by a lot, but enough that I found a tutor 2 floors down, a retired teacher who charged $20 an hour and let him sit on a folded quilt on her floor. By February, he was reading chapter books, slowly, following each word with his finger. but reading. There was a night in February when I came home late from a double shift and found a note on my kitchen table in his handwriting. It said, "I made us snack. Crackers and cheese is in the fridge. The spelling's wrong." I took a photo of it before I opened the refrigerator. I didn't sleep very well that night, for reasons I couldn't entirely explain. I didn't take the Denver job. I want to be honest about how that decision happened, because I've never told anyone the full of it. The department director called back with an offer. Real one. The salary, the title, the program I'd wanted to build for 6 years. I sat with it for 2 weeks. My supervisor sat across from me in her office and said, "Nobody on earth would blame you for taking this. The system would find him a placement, a good one. I can make calls." She wasn't wrong. I know those placements. Some of them are genuinely good. I also know that my nephew, at age 6, after 4 schools and 3 living situations in 1 year, had just started saying "my school." I know what the research says about attachment disruption in early childhood. I know it because I cite it in court reports. I know what it means when a child stops saying the name of a place and starts saying the word "my" in front of it. I withdrew my application on a Sunday afternoon. I sent the email and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet. No, drumroll, the refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, Levi was asleep with his library book open on the pillow beside him because he'd fallen asleep reading and I hadn't wanted to move it. I didn't tell anyone for a week. I needed to let it be a decision before it became a story. In March, my brother's business made the local news. Not the way he'd planned. Garrett Capital Consulting had been under review by the Ohio Division of Securities for 8 months. The fund he'd been promoting, high yield, private, family and friends rates, had collected money from 43 investors. Most of those investments had not gone into the real estate projects in the brochure. They had gone into the leased Mercedes, the Instagram ads, a vacation the previous January, and a second apartment in Dayton that nobody in our family knew about. The news segment used the word fraud. I watched it on my laptop at the kitchen table after Levi was asleep. My brother's face on screen, his LinkedIn photo, professional and confident, the camera holding on it longer than necessary. My mother called while the segment was still running. She went through every version of the alternate story. A misunderstanding, a reporting error, someone had it in for him. I listened. Then she said it. Not all at once, but in pieces over the course of the call. She admitted she had invested money with my brother. $22,000, her emergency fund, put into Garrett Capital Consulting 11 months ago. He had shown her statements. He had explained the returns. And he had told her that I'd just make her feel bad about it if she mentioned it to me. "He said you'd overthink it," she told me. "You know how you are." I knew exactly how I was. I was the smoke detector, and my brother had disabled me in advance with one sentence about my personality. I didn't say that. I asked her if she was okay. She said she didn't know. I said I'd come over Saturday. The securities investigation formally expanded in April to include fraud charges. My brother was in Columbus by then. The Miami trip had ended in November when the money did, and he had a criminal defense attorney, which cost more than I wanted to think about. The calls from him stopped. The silence was different from the Miami silence. The Miami silence had an itinerary behind it. This one had a lawyer. What filled the silence? Levi asking for seconds at dinner for the first time. Quietly, like it was a question that might be wrong. Me saying yes, and watching him not quite believe it, and then believe it. His gap-toothed smile when he finished the second bowl. I wrote it in the notebook. Not because I thought anyone would read it, but because I chart the things that matter. My nephew's caseworker updated his file in May. The new word was permanency. She said it with the careful tone people use when a word means more than its syllables. She walked me through the process. Petition for termination of parental rights, grounds of abandonment, documentation of unfitness. My brother had failed to make contact with the caseworker's office in 112 days. My sister-in-law, once located, declined to contest. 9 months of notebooks mattered. Judges don't love paperwork, the caseworker told me. They love records. There's a difference. I signed the petition on a Tuesday morning, with a pen with a rubber grip that had seen a lot of signatures. 9 weeks later, my brother came home. He did not call first. He showed up on a Sunday afternoon in June, which was its own message. My brother had never in his life arrived anywhere without thinking about the lighting. Levi was at the community pool with a neighbor's family. A planned thing, a normal Sunday thing. Which is the kind of sentence I'd stopped noticing had become possible. I opened the door, and my brother was standing there thinner, wearing a jacket too warm for June, and for 1 second I saw the kid from the science test, the one my mother would spend an hour with, and I felt the old pull toward him the way you feel a cold draft from a window you thought you'd sealed. He came inside. He sat at my kitchen table and folded his hands and said, "I'm going to make this simple. I'll consent to the adoption. Clean, full consent. No fight. No years of court dates eating up money neither of us has. Levi stays here exactly where he is. You get what you want." He let that sit, then he told me the price. He needed me to write a letter to the prosecutor's office stating that the money our mother gave him was a voluntary gift, not an investment. 1 letter, 2 paragraphs, just clarifying the nature of a family financial arrangement. His attorney had drafted language. It would take 10 minutes. And the other thing, he wanted to see Levi a few times before sentencing. Lunch, a park, a few photos. His attorney said a judge needed to see him as a father. He slid a document across my kitchen table. Consent to adoption, already drafted, my name typed neat on the petitioner line, tabs marking where I'd sign. "Everyone wins," he said. "Levi gets stability, you get the adoption without the fight, and I get a chance." He'd always been good at the version of things that sounded fair. I want to be honest about the 60 seconds after he stopped talking. The document was right there. Everything I'd spent 9 months building, handed to me in a folder. No contested hearing, no risk of motions dragging out for a year. Just ink. The price was 1 letter, not even a lie, he said, just a reframe. I sat with it, I really did. Then I thought about what I do for a living. I work with children in crisis, and the first thing I tell every family I sit with is the same. You cannot build safety on a false foundation. I've said it in courtrooms, I've written it in reports, I've believed it enough to make it my work. And I thought about Levi, who was at a community pool on a Sunday afternoon, because that had become a normal thing. Who had a blue coat in the right size hanging by my door. Who last week had read me 2 chapters of his book out loud in bed. Slowly, following each line with his finger, and had looked up at the end of the 2nd chapter and said, "Is there more?" If I signed that letter, every dinner I made in this kitchen for the next 20 years would be built on what my family had always done with the truth. Made it a little smaller when it was inconvenient, called it love, and passed it down. Levi had already been left once by that lesson. "No," I said. Just the one word. The voice I use at 3 in the morning in the ER when I have to tell a parent something real. I slid the consent form back, across the table past the fruit bowl. I'm not writing that letter, and I'm not scheduling photo sessions so a judge thinks you showed up. I'm taking the long road. The petition is filed. You can contest it, and if you do, I'll be at every hearing with 9 months of notes. That's what I've got. My brother looked at me. Something moved across his face I hadn't seen there before. Not anger, not confidence. Something closer to the look a person gets when they realize the audience they were counting on has already left. He picked up the consent form, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. He told me I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand how this worked. That family stood together, or they didn't stand at all, and I had always been the one who understood that. I said I understood it better than I ever had. He left. I stood in my kitchen for a while. Outside through the window, it was an ordinary June afternoon. Somebody was mowing a lawn on the block behind mine. The sound was just the sound of grass being cut, which is all it was. My attorney called Monday morning. I'd already logged the visit in the notebook, dated, everything written down. My brother's attorney filed a motion to contest the termination in July. The motion was withdrawn 6 weeks later, on the advice of counsel. My attorney told me later that contesting an adoption, while simultaneously defending wire fraud charges, was not a position his legal team had recommended, and that the money for family law had run out when the criminal defense started. The termination hearing was in September. I was not in the room when the judge ruled. I was at a school open house, sitting in a small plastic chair at a second-grade table covered in crayon drawings, while Levi showed me his cubby and his pencil box and introduced me to his teacher with a sentence he said. So easily it stopped my breath for a second. This is my aunt. She's who I live with. Not she's taking care of me. Not I'm staying at her house. She's who I live with. I shook the teacher's hand. I held it together until we got to the car. The adoption was finalized on a Thursday morning in February. The winter Levi turned 7. Small courtroom, good light. My supervisor took the morning off and cried louder than anyone. The judge was a broad-shouldered man, with reading glasses on a chain, and the unhurried manner of someone who has seen enough of these to know which ones matter. He let Levi sign his name at the bottom of the document, a formality, not legally required. But the judge said every child who wanted to could put their name on the day they got a permanent family. Levi signed in careful capitals. His name. Then he looked at the pen like it had done something remarkable. In the elevator on the way out, he said, "Is my name still the same?" I said, "Yes, same as before, nothing changes." He thought about that. "But now you're in it too," he said. "Like official." I said, "Yes, official." He nodded like that settled something he'd been keeping track of for a long time. That night after dinner, I was washing dishes when I heard a small sound from the entryway, the scratch of the closet door. I dried my hands and went to look. Levi was kneeling on the floor in front of the coat hooks, both his coats laid out in front of him. The faded yellow one, which I'd kept without quite knowing why. Maybe because throwing it away felt like throwing away something that hadn't been his fault. And the blue one, the right size, the one I'd bought in October. He folded the yellow one the way I'd once shown him to fold a sweatshirt. He put it on the high shelf in the hall closet. Then he hung the blue coat back on his hook. He stood and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. "The yellow one's too small," he said. "It is," I said. "Can I keep it up there anyway?" I said, "Of course." He went back to the kitchen to finish his milk. I stood in the entry a moment alone. The blue coat hung on the hook at kid height, the one I'd installed in the first week, with a drill I borrowed from the neighbor downstairs. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't a speech. It was a child putting a coat where it went, because this was home now, and things in this home went where they went. Here is where everyone ended up, because you've stayed with me long enough to have earned it. My mother sold her car, and most of her savings went toward the restitution process, which will repay pennies on the dollar for years. She lives in a smaller apartment 12 minutes from us by bus now, and she comes for dinner every Sunday. She has learned, not all the way, not without backsliding, but learning, to sit with Levi without trying to arrange him. Last month she sat beside him on the couch while he read to her, and she did not correct his pronunciation once. And when he looked up at the end of the chapter, she said, "Read me the next part," and meant it. One Sunday evening, she was doing dishes and said, without turning around, "I didn't want to see it because seeing it would mean I had to do something, and I didn't know what to do." She rinsed the bowl in her hands. "That's not an excuse. That's just the true reason." I poured her more tea. Some things are better with a long conversation around them. And some things are better with just the plain sentence and nothing else. That one was the second kind. My brother pled guilty in November to wire fraud and making false representations to investors. The judge gave him 4 years. The restitution order is longer than the sentence. He writes from the facility in Ohio. The letters read like performance notes: accountability, this chapter, growth. He is not once asked what Levi is reading, or what he wants for his birthday, or whether the gap in his smile has filled in yet on the bottom left. Those letters are not about his son. I answer them with short weather and a school photo, and I leave the rest of the door for Levi to open or close when he is old enough to choose. In Denver, the department lead position was filled by someone else. I applied for a senior clinical role at my own hospital and got it in January. Not the same thing, but it comes with its own office and a team of 4 and cases that are different from the ones I used to carry, because now I help other people carry theirs. I find I am better at it than I was before. I think that has something to do with understanding the difference between a system that absorbs things and a person who chooses to. On my refrigerator today, there is a drawing Levi made of our apartment. 2 windows, a door, a coat hook with 2 coats on it, one blue, one yellow, and in the middle, 2 stick figures, one tall, one short. The short one has a gap in its smile. Underneath, in careful second-grade capitals, home. He taped it up himself on a Sunday morning while I was still making coffee. I saw it and didn't say anything, because if I had said anything, I would have had to explain myself, and some things don't need explaining. I spent 31 years believing that being reliable was the same thing as being loved. It took one too small yellow jacket and one little boy standing in the corner of my living room, very still, reading the air, to teach me the difference. The love that holds is never the kind that performs. It's the kind that buys the right-sized coat, that packs the lunch the night before, that leaves the light on in the hallway and stays. That's my story. One doorbell on a Wednesday night, one jacket that didn't fit, and a blue coat that finally hangs where it belongs. If this reminded you of someone who shows up for the kids, for the family, for you, the quiet ones who never ask for credit, send them this video and tell them you see them. Drop a comment with where you're listening from. Subscribe so you never miss a story, and I'll see you in the next one.